But what I do want to bring to the air is the idea of the 49ers offseason, because you and I were down at the OTAs or the mandatory minicamp, I think that was. There's OTAs, there's mandatory minicamp, there's training camp, there's all different levels of offseason. Bottom line, it's pro athletes with helmets and shorts, either running around competing or not, depending on your status on the team. You know, we saw Nick Bosa out there, but he wasn't running around doing much. And a lot of the 2s and the 3s, there was no Brock Purdy. There was Sam Darnold and there was Trey Lance. And so I do want to get your temperature on what we heard from Albert Breer in terms of the quarterback pecking order in Santa Clara.
Well, are we gonna play the cut from Breer, or are we gonna just talk about it? I would say that the one thing is that Breer kind of reshaped the dialogue, the conversation. He basically said that, the 49ers last year were willing to risk the season to advance Trey Lance's development, and that this year they won't risk the season to advance that development. And, basically it sounds like the 49ers, without saying as much publicly, have looked at Trey Lance and say, he's only played 1 year of college football. He's only really played 1 full year of football since high school. And that to put him out there means to stomach a number of mistakes. And that, I always felt like they were going to go with Brock Purdy over Trey Lance because of the way Purdy played. And that is indeed the case. But now the Albert Breers of the world are kind of suggesting that if Brock Purdy can't go, and all the indications are that he will be able to go by week 1, but there's a lot of unknowns still, right? If he can't go, and NFL teams, the Niners are going to take it very slowly with Brock Purdy. He's got a whole career in front of him. They're not going to force him onto the field in week 1. So I think the assumption was, by most of us, myself included, was if Brock's not ready to roll week 1, that it's Trey Lance. But Breer's like, well, he's kind of reshaped it. And it's not really about Trey's development or his potential substantial upside. It's which quarterback can best keep the 49ers afloat for the first, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks of the season, if indeed Brock can't go. And that he quickly asks that question and then answers it. Breer says he thinks they prefer Darnold over Lance if that's the scenario, despite the fact that long-term Trey may have the higher ceiling. So I think that's significant. Significant. And there's, we're starting to see glimpses, and I don't know if they're real or not. We're starting to see glimpses into the Niners' thought process on Trey, and none of them seem overly positive for Trey, at least playing in the present.
Yeah, no doubt. And in the present, if you're the 49ers, you're more interested in what you were describing in terms of keep the team afloat, as opposed to playing Trey Lance, a quarterback who rightfully will need more time to get to be as good of a player as he can possibly be. And if you're the 49ers and you have a ready-made roster, you probably don't want to spend the time to get Trey Lance ready when you're in the championship window. Here is Albert Breer on the very subject we're talking about, Trey Lance and his readiness to be QB1 if Brock Purdy's not ready, or to even be QB2 at all.
So the ideal thing would be to just throw him out there and live with his mistakes. But that's what the Niners were going to do last year. And that sort of ship has sailed. They know how good they are. They know the window they're in. They know they've got one of the most talented rosters in football. And so at this point, they don't really feel like they can throw a season overboard in the name of Trey Lance's development. And especially if you're talking about, well, we may only need him for 4 or 5 weeks till Brock Purdy gets back. Now you're talking about something different. You're not talking about developing the best quarterback for the playoffs. You're talking about the guy who can keep you best afloat for a month, right? That'd probably be Sam Darnold over Trey Lance at this point, right? Even if Lance has the higher ceiling. So I think a lot of different things are going into this. And it makes it much different than last year when the idea was we're going to sink or swim with him. We're going to ride out his bumps in September and October with the hope that we get a better quarterback than we had by the time we get to January.
That's courtesy of the Colin Cowherd show. And so, Larry, it seems curious that things would have changed between then and now in terms of a willingness to ride it out, quote unquote, with Trey Lance. Is that new information? Have they seen things from Trey Lance that have deterred them from wanting to even try to put him out here in this scenario?
it's a little difficult to decipher, isn't it? Because it's like we've been hearing kind of this from a number of different people. Schefter suggested that it's going to be Darnold. Others have suggested it's going to be Darnold. And I think a lot of us sitting, being relatively unimpressed with what Darnold has offered forward so far, both at USC and with the Jets and with the Panthers, are kind of like, really? Sam Darnold, 5 years removed from being the third pick overall, with a ton of interceptions, all kinds of turnovers, that he is a better guy. You're going to be better equipped to win games in September and October with Sam Darnold over Trey Lance. I mean, if indeed that is their thinking, that is kind of almost an admission that Trey Lance is a bust, or that Trey Lance is significantly more raw than they anticipated when they drafted him.
Right.
And they had to know he was raw because no quarterback drafted in the last 40 years threw fewer passes at the collegiate level than what Trey Lance threw at North Dakota State. So they knew that stat before they drafted Trey. So are they really surprised that the super raw quarterback from the FCS level that they drafted, and I would imagine studied, to the nth degree, are they surprised that the raw quarterback's raw? Or is it just that now they feel like they cannot give away any more seasons to quarterback development, and it's all about, and I've been saying this all off season, that I really think the main reason they're going forward with Brock Purdy over any other quarterback is that Brock fits their timeline. Brock won games in the present. They feel like they need to win games in the present, and they don't want to. And I don't know that there's this kind of pressure, because I think they've been in 3 of the last 4 NFC Championship games. They've reached the Super Bowl. They should have a pretty long leash with Jed. But if there's some pressure from ownership to get that Lombardi, and I'll say this, from being down there a lot this year, from talking to the people behind the scenes, the 49ers have imposed a level of pressure on themselves this year where they want to win the Super Bowl every year, but this is their year.
Well, think about the window in terms of
they're all in on it.
I think the pressure comes from inside the locker room more than it comes from the C-suite up in the corporate headquarters. I would imagine that the pressure is coming from Trent Williams, who is near the end of his career but still playing elite football, George Kittle, who's now going to be north of 30, Christian McCaffrey, who's finally on a winning team. You've got a Debo and Brandon Ayuk question that may be approaching in terms of, can you keep both or not? So I think the pressure comes from inside that locker room because they all know how close they've been. To your point about you drafted a raw quarterback and you're surprised that he's still raw, I think that the surprise would be that he hasn't been able to develop as fast as you would have liked. And you can look at the injury to the finger and then the injury to the ankle and say, well, maybe that's partly why he hasn't developed. But now he's fully healthy, and you're seeing him in OTAs, and you're seeing him in mandatory minicamp out there in direct competition with Brandon Allen and with Sam Darnold. And what you're seeing may not be as good as what you had hoped you were going to see. Even though he hasn't played, he's had a chance to watch and learn and absorb. And if you do go in, Larry, to this preseason situation here coming up in about a month when all the players start to report and we all ramp up for another NFL season, if he is QB3, how can you even keep him on the roster at that point without having his future trade value completely bottom out?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. If you believe in him long term, will you pay the freight to keep him as the most expensive quarterback on your team as he sits third on the depth chart? And then what's working against the 49ers here is that the league sees the rest of it. Kyle Shanahan made Jimmy Garoppolo a pretty average quarterback, and he got to a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo, kind of hiding his deficiencies. Kyle Shanahan got one win away from a Super Bowl berth with us, Mr. Irrelevant this year. Kyle Shanahan made Nick Mullins at times look good. And so I think the thinking around the league is and this was something that Cowherd kind of threw out there. Cowherd's got his own kind of conflict of interest. We could hit on that. But, Cowherd's thought is that, look, if other teams are looking at Kyle Shanahan, and if Kyle can't develop Trey Lance, why are they going to be able to develop Trey Lance?
Right.
I did find it really interesting, though, when I interviewed Randy Mueller, the former GM of the Dolphins and Saints, and I asked him, I said, Randy, where did you have Trey Lance on your board in the draft that he came out in? And he said, Krug, I didn't have him on the board at all.
Not on the board at all?
Not on the board at all. I said, not on the board? Randy, why? Why did you not have him on the board? He's like, there wasn't enough to go by. And I don't take wild stabs on projections and workouts.
Well, and that's the thing about Brock Purdy is there was a lot to go on. He played 4 years as a starter, at Iowa State, and so he threw a ton of passes so you could at least make a determination. Now, I don't think anybody had him as a higher than a 7th round grade. Otherwise, he would have gotten taken earlier in the draft, but you at least had something on which to base your assessment of Brock Purdy. 888-957-9570 is the phone number. Also, the Comcast Business text line. This comes in from the 925. Question, you guys. Do you hold Kyle Shanahan responsible for the most costly draft pick in history, for him reaching too far, for thinking he could make any quarterback a star? I'm not trying to frame this in terms of fire Kyle right now, because he's been an unbelievable success as the coach, and they've made many, many great draft picks. But in terms of this pick and this move, what does this do to the overall confidence in Shanahan and John Lynch?
Yeah, I mean, it's the collective we. I mean, who made the Warrior picks? Joe, his kid, Mike. Who's making the picks? Kerr. I mean, Kerr's makes the most money, right? Kerr makes more money than... So doesn't Kerr have a loud voice in the Warrior room? Well, there's still a GM, and there's still a personnel guys, and there's scouts, and there's an owner who's involved. So it's like, if the Warriors can kind of hide behind the collective we on their swing and miss on James Wiseman, which clearly they are, then should the 49ers be able to hide behind the collective we on the Trey Lance selection? In a lot of ways, it's very similar, right? You dreamt big, you took the big swing, and in, I guess, the Warriors' case, to date, they lost, right? I mean, James Wiseman didn't develop here. I don't, why? I mean, is that on Bob Myers? Is it on Joe? Is it on Steve? I don't know. It's on them for sure. And I would say the same thing. I mean, the 49ers drafted the most inexperienced quarterback to come out of the draft. It was an unprecedented kind of a situation. And I guess, and then like what's going on right now? I mean, if they really believe that Sam Darnold is the number 2 and that Trey Lance, the 3rd pick overall, years in, is only good enough to be the 3rd quarterback, that is a stunning development. But what's the end game here? Is he going to be released? Are they going to continue paying him $10 million, $17 million next year to be the 3rd string quarterback?
And there's a big cap hit, too, if you trade him. If you do trade him.
Not now, because it's after July 1st. If you trade him pre-July 1st.
So in a week, okay, you don't have that same.
No, excuse me. It's not now. It was after June 1st in the NFL.
Gotcha. So even for next year's cap hit, that goes away.
It's not a big cap hit to move him right now, but it would have been a big cap hit to move him on draft day. And but they did clear enough room going into that draft where if somebody had been wowed on the clock, that they had the ability to absorb that draft room. I mean, or that trade, that penalty, if you will. So, but and why, if they really think he's the 3rd quarterback, and all these reports from Breer and all these guys, and they're right on, and Darnold in their mind is number 2, and now you got Brandon Allen, who was the backup to Joe Burrow. He was the number 2 in Cincinnati, and now he's signed here to be number 4. Or did he sign here to be number 3, wink, wink, because we're going to create room? Did Darnold come here to be number 3? Or did he come here to be wink, wink, you're number 2, and actually you'll start at the beginning of the year if Brock can't go?
Mark makes a good point about the quickness with which Sam Darnold signed, indicating that he was given a good, solid indication at that point that he would at least be the number 2 with a chance to be the number 1 if Brock Purdy wasn't ready. Because Sam Darnold, as you remember, signed very early in the free agency period, and I don't think that he would have done that with the thought that he was going to come in and be the 3 and have to fight to be QB2. I think he was given at least some indication of the reality of the situation. Brock Purdy is getting healed up after surgery, and Trey Lance is a quarterback that we're not sold on. But if Trey Lance is in fact QB3 and we get through the next month and it appears pretty clear that Sam Darnold is going to be the backup, what do you do with Trey Lance? 888-957-9570. The Comcast Business text line is the same number as well. Let's go to Dave in Livermore, who wants to weigh in. What's going on, Dave?
Hey, what's going on, fellas? I got a couple of things. The first one is, why are we listening, if this is not trade season, why are we listening to guys that aren't even going to the practices? Larry, you went to the practice. Cone did. Lombardi did. Miyako did. They all did, and we're not hearing this from them. What we're hearing is that Trey is looking better than Darnold, which he's supposed to because he knows the offense. The second thing I got is if they made that promise to Darnold, that almost makes me sick because they're basically saying we don't care about those 3 picks. Trey's never going to get better, and it is on Kyle because he's the one that has to make that statement that says, I cannot coach this player. When all we've heard is that he does everything that is asked of him. He's the first one to show up, clogs the most hours on the tablet, and is constantly working on the off season to get better. That's all we hear about the kid. So I'm confused, but I'm definitely not listening to Schefter or Breer or Colin Coward about a team that they don't show up to the practices to.
I mean,
That's all I got, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
I mean,
appreciate the
one,
call.
I do understand that because if you ask me, and I feel like I know a little something about football,
and you're out there every single day.
yeah, and I to me, Sam Darnold and Trey Lance have looked about the same. I mean, I don't see I think Sam's taken more shots down the field in the offseason, and I think his accuracy is a little bit better down the field. I think Trey's, taking fewer shots down the field. There's been days where Trey has been more accurate than Sam. There's been days where Brandon Allen was more accurate than all of the 3. He was the most accurate. But then there's days where Brandon Allen couldn't complete a pass. So I actually have a scouting buddy in the Midwest or Southeast, kind of like right in the middle of the country, who called me this week and was like, dude, Brandon Allen, the people that I talked to, is absolutely going to challenge Sam Darnold for that number 2 job. I said, what, number 2? What about Trey
number
Lance?
3? Yeah.
What about Trey Lance? And he's like, well, Trey Lance is got a lot of mistakes to make before he's ready to go, according to the people that I'm talking to. And I'm like, well, I'm watching him in practice. He looks pretty good in practice. Now, practice is just that. It's practice. It's scripted.
But in practice, you're supposed to look really, really good, even though you're going up against a tough defense. And, you and I were out there at practice, and you see that defense, and they are, Trent Williams isn't out there, and it's not live bullets. Nobody's actually trying to tackle anybody. But in terms of just Trey Lance and Sam Darnold going back there, it should be a little bit easier to play pitch and catch in that setting. And you're right, neither one of them in the times I've been out there, neither one of them looks that comfortable or that good commanding an offense.
I think we're going to find out a lot more about all the Niner quarterbacks when the Niners practice against the Raiders in advance of their preseason game.
Good call.
I think that's where we'll get a real indication. I also think that, the callers blaming Shanahan, but isn't the negative that you would feel about Shanahan if you want to hold his feet to the fire on Lance, isn't that negated by the fact that they found a quarterback that is yet to lose a game that he started and finished with the last pick in the draft? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, your job is to find a young quarterback that can lead the team. They did find that quarterback, but they found him in the 7th round and not with the 3rd pick. So, I mean, if you're going to sit there and say, blame Shanahan for the Lance pick,
sure,
don't you have to kind of credit him for the Purdy pick?
You do. And, you also have to credit him for the Purdy development, which I think is major points in his column. But then you look at the fact that he traded up and he traded multiple firsts to go up and get a guy. According to your scout friend, he didn't even have him on the board. And obviously they saw something in Trey Lance that has not come to fruition in terms of, him being the quarterback that they thought that he was going to develop into being. The athleticism were there, the tools were there, the body was there, and so far due to injury, his own personal development, and the fact that he hasn't gotten the opportunity, he hasn't turned into that player. So now, if you're the 49ers, what do? You don't want Trey Lance to sit there and be your 3rd-string quarterback, and I don't think Trey Lance wants to be a 3rd-string quarterback. So do you go ahead and bank on Darnold and Allen as your 3 quarterbacks and trade Trey Lance, or what do you do to try to make that quarterback room work?
I think this comes to a head at the cut down. At the cut down right there, they played September 10th against the Steelers. They're going to cut down that thing to 53 at the end of the preseason. I think that's the point where it gets decided. And I think what they're hoping is that they roll into the camp and roll into preseason and Purdy's ready to play and healthy, and that all of their quarterbacks look good this summer in preseason and in those dual practices with the Raiders, and that some quarterback goes down. And if a quarterback goes down and Trey Lance looks great in the you know the way it works. How you look on the field tells all and jumps in front of everything. You could have the worst workouts. You could have the worst interview. If that guy goes in the preseason and has a game where he throws for 250 and runs for 75 yards and a touchdown, and those highlights circulate, and then suddenly Kirk Cousins blows an Achilles August 18th, guess what? You're probably going to get a first-round pick from the Vikings for Trey Lance. But it's August is a volatile time in the NFL. A lot can happen, but I think the Niners are holding on to Trey and not knowing who's going to develop, who's going to play well, and what market may develop for any of their quarterbacks at the cutdown.